So this video lesson takes an in-depth look at what it means to add with negative integers. Now in this video we're taking the idea of adding away from the idea of 17 plus 12 equals 29, where we have two positive integers that we're adding together, and we're exploring it with ideas of such as what is 17 plus negative 12, or even negative 17 plus 12. Maybe you want to find out what negative 17 plus negative 12 is. But in any case, we're now going to start to add negative integers to the discussion. So we need to go back and think about fundamentally what does addition represent. And we're not talking about just what we know before, where if we had talked about 25 plus 14, the two most common ways of understanding what that is to say, well, if we have 25 books and we are adding 14 books to it, in total we have a number of books that is 25 plus 14, which is 39 books. We've also seen it as 25 plus 14, setting it up with a vertical addition where we're talking about adding together the values in each of the same place value columns. So 5 ones plus 4 ones is equal to 9 ones. 2 tens plus 1 10 is equal to 3 tens, and so the answer that we have is 39. And this works quite well for us when all we're doing is talking about what to do with positive integers. But when we start to add things like, what's 25 plus negative 14? Then the idea of having 25 books and adding negative 14 books to it doesn't quite do the trick. And we can't add 25 and negative 14 to get 39, because that would mean that 25 plus 14 and 25 plus negative 14 are the same thing, which means, and that just can't happen. So we do know that fundamentally addition can represent grouping small groups of objects together into larger and larger groups of objects. And that's really what we get at when we have something like 25 books plus 14 books is 39 books. We are grouping objects together into larger and larger groups. And this interpretation of it relies on positive numbers. But I want to take a look at something else here for a second and look at addition as the idea of leaps on a number line. So what we have is we have a map here that is centered around New York City, but contains some major cities apart from New York. And suppose that we're trying to find out what the distance is from Philadelphia to New Haven. Now, we may not know what the distance straight from Philadelphia to New Haven is. And if we didn't, we have a number of ways of finding it. But suppose that we couldn't just look up somewhere what that distance is. But we had two other pieces of information. We have a piece of information of what is the distance from Philadelphia to New York. And we know what the distance is from New York to New Haven. If we knew both of those pieces of information, then we could say that the entire distance from Philadelphia to New Haven is the distance from Philadelphia to New York plus the distance from New York to New Haven. And that entire distance is the same as the distance from Philadelphia to New Haven. In this case, both of those smaller distances represent a leap in space, traveling over a distance from Philadelphia to New York, and then traveling over another distance from New York to New Haven. And so, altogether, the distance from Philadelphia to New Haven is just the sum of those two different distances. And when we talk about addition as leaps on a number line, that's really what we're talking about. So let's take a look at this idea when it comes to leaps on a number line in the positive direction. So let's say that we want to look at an addition of 15 plus 25. Now, we could start the idea at 15. Make this leap on a number line with 25, and we can get to the answer that we want. But if we think of that positive 15 as just another leap on the number line, then we can start at 0. And we can see what we're talking about when we talk about the distance between two places as just the sum of two smaller distances. In this case, the eventual answer, which is 40, the eventual sum, can be seen as starting at 0, a jump from 0 to 15, which is the first number, and a jump from 15 over the course of 25 up to 40. Now this is still going to hold true no matter what two numbers that we have. So let's take another look at this. We have, in this case, we'll say 15 plus 30. Now we know this is going to be 45 from our basic rules of addition, but let's look at it now as 15 plus 30 on the number line. this 25 is going to be taken away and not used anymore. Our 15 is going to remain where it is because that's what we're starting with, and when we add 30 to it, 15 plus 30, in fact, gives us 45. Now, what if we're talking about all negative integers, and our negative integers are just understood as leaps in the negative direction on the number line? If our positive integers are leaps in the positive direction, the negative integers should just be leaps in the negative direction. So negative 15 plus negative 25 then is going to be equal to what? Well, if we look at it with negative 15 as starting at 0, jumping down, and starting at negative 15, even though this arrow here is not perfect, and we take another leap of negative 25, we're going to end up right around where perhaps we expect to, perhaps not. This is just the same as negative 40. And we can see that this has to be the answer because negative 15 plus an accompanying leap of negative 25 gives us an overall leap of 40 units in the negative direction. And conveniently, that is the same, although all negative, as our answer of 15 plus 25. So 15 plus 25 is 40. Negative 15 plus negative 25 is 40. And that brings us to the rule for adding integers with the same sign, and that's that you add the two absolute values. And the sum has the same sign as the two addends. And it's very important that the two addends have the same sign. So in this case, we might have 12 plus 17. Well, 12 plus 17 we know is 29. Because we can add them up in our place value columns. 2 ones plus 7 ones is 9 ones. 110 plus 110 is 2 tens. And we get a positive 29. Similarly, that means that negative 12 plus negative 17 has got to be the sum of the two absolute values, but negative instead, because both of these numbers are negative. Well, the absolute value of negative 12 is 12. The absolute value of negative 17 is 17. So 29 is the absolute value of our answer. Take these negative signs, slap them on the answer because two negative numbers added together, two leaps in the negative direction, cannot be positive, it should be negative. So that is, in fact, negative 29. And if you are unfamiliar or need some review on absolute values, go ahead and look back at the absolute value video lesson for some review there. But for right now, go ahead and pause the video and work on numbers 1 and 2 on adding integers with the same sign. Well, for number 1, we have two integers that are positive. So this is just our familiar addition. The integers have the same sign, so we're going to add their absolute values. 83's absolute value is 83. 17's absolute value is 17. You can add this all together and find that this is 100. Now, if we're looking at negative 24 plus negative 47 for number 2, the absolute value of negative 24 is 24. The absolute value of negative 47 is 47, so we're going to add these two together. And since both of these are negative, we know that we can just add together the two absolute values. This entire thing adds up to 71. You can verify that for yourself using the vertical addition with 1s plus 1s and 10s plus 10s. Bring the negative sign down, get to negative 71. But now what do we do if we have integers that have mixed signs? That is, if we're saying, for example, what is 25 plus negative 15? Well, in this case, we definitely want to view both numbers as leaps on a number line. So let's take the 25, put it on the number line, and see that our leap now is 25. And then if we take the 15 and put it also on the number line, then we can see that this actually causes the absolute value of our sum to be smaller than that first one. If we take a leap of 25 in the positive direction, and then retreat by 15, we're actually going to be closer to 0. And if we go back up to that map with Philadelphia, New York, and New Haven, saying 25 plus a negative 15 is like you started your way from Philadelphia up to New York and got maybe 90 miles of the way to New Haven, but then you decided to turn around and go back 45 miles. Well, the total distance that you've traveled is now going to be closer to Philadelphia than that 90 miles was because you went some in one direction and then back in that direction. And this isn't to scale, but say that's 90 miles, and this is back 45. So the idea of adding integers together on a number line when they have mixed signs has to be the same thing. If we've gone 25 units in the positive direction, jump back 15. We're not going to go all the way back to 0 because 15 is less than 25. But we will move backwards, and in this case, to 10. So what we've more or less done is we've gone 25 units, and now we've undone 15 of those units. And so 25 plus negative 15 is more or less the same, and in fact it is the same, as 25 minus 15. Now what happens if we were to reverse this idea, and the negative number were to be larger than the positive number? Well, let's turn our number line around. And even though this is an upside down number line now, it still is 0. If we work backwards, we can go to negative 10, negative 20, negative 30, negative 40, etc. But we're going to look at it just from the point of view of these negative numbers. What if we're looking at negative 30 plus 15? Two numbers of two different signs. Start out with our negative 30, make our jump backwards to negative 30, and now we're adding a positive 15. But in this case, because the negative number has a greater absolute value, we're moving 30 units in the negative direction and then retreating and going back 15 units in the positive. We're not going to make it all the way back to 0. Excuse me there, that wasn't particularly helpful. We're not going all the way back to 0, but we're going part of the way. So of the 30 units that we moved, we've taken away 15 of them. And we are now 15 units then in the negative direction. So when we're adding together integers with unlike signs, you're going to subtract the absolute values. And then the sum has the same sign as the addend with a larger absolute value. And this is because one number represents a jump in the positive direction, one number represents a jump in the negative direction. And by adding the integers with unlike signs, we are taking away some of our movements. Whichever one has the larger absolute value, we will keep that sign, because if we jump, for example, 25 units to the right, and then retreat by 15, then we're still going to have 10 units left, because we're going to take 25 minus 15 is 10. And then the larger absolute value is 25. So our sign is positive. On the other hand, if we had negative 25 plus a positive 15, we would still take the idea of 25 minus 15, because they have different signs, and get 10. But in this case, negative 25 has the larger absolute value, so the answer is negative 10. Go ahead and pause the video and see what you can do with that idea with just these two examples, 17 plus negative 83 and negative 24 plus 47, numbers 3 and 4. Well, if we look at 17 plus negative 83, number 3, we can see that our two integers have the opposite signs. That means what we're going to do, because one is positive and one is negative, is we are going to subtract the absolute values. The absolute values are 83 minus 17, and that, once we do some borrowing here, gives us 66 as an answer. Now, we're going to look at what the larger absolute value is, which is 83. 83's sign is negative, so our overall sign is going to be negative. 17 plus negative 83 is negative 66. For number 4, again, two opposite signs, positive and negative, so we're going to subtract the absolute values, 47 minus 24. In this case, we leave with an absolute value of 23. And we see that 47, as the larger absolute value, is positive, so the answer is positive 23. Now, because of the length of this video, the practice problems that normally that would be found at the end of this are actually found in a different video lesson called Practice with Adding with Negative Integers. So I encourage you to go ahead and look at that and do a few more practice problems regarding these kinds of numbers.